Every parent's worst nightmare is watching their child suffer, knowing there's nothing they can do to help. For 8-year-old Tommy Sullivan, that nightmare was watching his mama waste away while the whole town whispered behind closed doors about the scandal that surrounded his birth. In the dusty frontier town of Cedar Ridge, Clara Sullivan was dying, and her young son was running out of time to save her. The schoolteacher had kept her secrets buried for years, but now those secrets were about to surface in the most unexpected way. When desperation drove Tommy to approach the wealthiest man in town, rancher Bo McAllister, with a heartbreaking plea, neither of them knew how much their lives were about to change. Clara had never told anyone who Tommy's real father was, not even Tommy himself. But when Bo looked into the boy's eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold, his own reflection staring back at him. What would happen when the truth about Tommy's parentage finally came to light? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the schoolhouse floor as Clara Sullivan pressed her palm against the worn wooden desk, steadying herself against another wave of weakness. The leather-bound Bible beside her lesson plans bore the marks of 8 years in Cedar Ridge, pressed wildflowers from her students tucked between favorite verses, margins filled with her careful handwriting, and a cover soft with use. It had been her constant companion since arriving in town with nothing but a swollen belly and a heart full of secrets. Outside, the September breeze carried the scent of harvest time, but Clara knew she wouldn't see another spring. The consumption had taken hold with a vengeance, and Dr. Henderson's grave expressions told her what his gentle words couldn't. She had maybe weeks, perhaps a month if she was fortunate. The thought of leaving Tommy alone in this world made her chest tighten with something far worse than her failing lungs. "Mrs. Sullivan?" The voice belonged to Lucy Henderson, the doctor's 9-year-old daughter, whose arithmetic had improved remarkably under Clara's patient guidance. "Are you feeling poorly again?" Clara straightened, forcing her most reassuring smile. "Just catching my breath, sweet pea. Why don't you help me pass out these spelling lists while the others finish their morning chores?" The one-room schoolhouse buzzed with the comfortable energy of children settling into their day. At the back of the room, Tommy Sullivan sat with his slate, working through problems that would challenge students twice his age. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he concentrated, and Clara's heart squeezed with familiar pride and pain. He had his father's intense focus, the same way of pursing his lips when deep in thought. If only she could tell him the truth about where he came from, but some secrets were too dangerous to share. Tommy had been asking questions lately, not about his father exactly, but about family, about why they didn't have grandparents or cousins like the other children. Clara had deflected with stories about distant relatives back east, but her son was too smart to be satisfied with vague explanations much longer. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house had stopped by yesterday with another pot of soup, her kind eyes full of unspoken worry. "Clara, dear," she'd said in her gentle way, "you know Tommy's always welcome at my table. That boy's practically family anyway." It was the closest the older woman had come to discussing Clara's condition directly, but they both understood the subtext. The truth was, Clara had built a life in Cedar Ridge through sheer determination and the town's grudging acceptance. When she'd arrived 8 years ago, obviously with child and no husband in sight, tongues had wagged for months. But she'd proven herself as a teacher, shown up to every church service with her head held high, and slowly earned a measure of respect. The whispers never completely stopped, but they'd grown quieter. Still, there were those like Martha Henley who never missed a chance to make pointed comments about certain examples being set for the children. Martha's pinched face and sharp tongue had made Clara's early months in town particularly difficult. But even Martha couldn't deny that Tommy was one of the brightest, most well-behaved children in Cedar Ridge. Through the window, Clara caught sight of Bo McAllister riding past on his way to the general store, his broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. Her breath caught, and she gripped the edge of her desk until her knuckles went white. After 8 years, the sight of him still had the power to undo her carefully constructed composure. Bo owned the largest ranch in the territory, employed half the men in town, and was respected by everyone who mattered. He was also the one man in Cedar Ridge who could destroy everything she'd built with a single conversation. Not intentionally, Bo McAllister was a good man, perhaps too good for his own peace of mind. But the truth had a way of surfacing when you least expected it. She'd loved him once, completely and without reservation. For 3 months in the summer before Tommy was born, she'd believed they might have a future together. But love wasn't always enough to overcome circumstances, and some chances, once lost, never came around again. "Mama?" Tommy appeared at her elbow, his young face creased with worry. "You look awful pale. Should I fetch Dr. Henderson?" Clara smoothed his unruly hair, marveling again at how much he resembled his father. The same green eyes, the same stubborn chin, even the same habit of tilting his head when he was thinking. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired. Why don't you ring the bell for morning lessons?" As Tommy bounded toward the schoolhouse bell, Clara opened her Bible to Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future." She'd read those words countless times over the years, clinging to the promise when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. But now, facing the end of her own future, Clara found herself wondering what plans the Lord had for Tommy. The boy needed more than hope. He needed security, family, a father who could teach him to be the man she saw in him already. And there was only one person in Cedar Ridge who could provide all of that. The same person she'd spent 8 years avoiding. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to protect Tommy from the complications of his parentage, she might have robbed him of the very thing he needed most. But it was too late for regrets now. She'd made her choices, right or wrong, and she'd have to trust that somehow, some way, Tommy would find his way to the truth when the time was right. As her students settled into their seats for the day's lessons, Clara pressed the pressed flower bookmark deeper into her Bible and began to teach, pushing thoughts of mortality and missed chances aside for a few more precious hours. But even as she led the children through their recitations, her mind kept drifting to the man on horseback and the son who didn't know his father's name. The morning wore on with the familiar rhythm of school lessons, but Clara could feel time slipping away like sand through her fingers. Soon, very soon, she would have to find the courage to do what she should have done 8 years ago. Tommy deserved to know where he came from, and Bo deserved to know he had a son, even if it meant risking everything she'd worked so hard to build. Tommy Sullivan had never been inside Peterson's general store without his mother, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The wooden floors creaked under his small boots as he pushed through the heavy door, the bell overhead announcing his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt out of place with the weight of his mission. The scent of leather, coffee, and tobacco created a distinctly masculine atmosphere that made Tommy feel even smaller than his 8 years. Behind the counter, Mr. Peterson looked up from his ledger with surprise. "Well, hello there, Tommy. Shouldn't you be in school right about now?" "Yes, sir, but Mama's feeling poorly again, and Dr. Henderson said I should fetch some of that tonic for her cough." The lie came easier than Tommy expected, though his stomach twisted with guilt. Mama had always taught him that honesty was the most important virtue, but sometimes protecting someone you loved required bending the truth. Mr. Peterson's weathered face softened with sympathy. "Of course, son. Let me get that for you." He disappeared behind the rows of shelves, leaving Tommy alone with his racing heart and sweaty palms. That's when he saw him. Bo McAllister stood near the back of the store, examining a new shipment of saddle leather with the careful attention of a man who understood quality. Tommy had seen the rancher around town countless times, but never this close. He was taller than Tommy had imagined, with broad shoulders that filled his work shirt and hands that looked capable of gentle strength. His dark hair was shot through with silver at the temples, and when he glanced up, Tommy saw the kindest green eyes he'd ever encountered, green eyes that looked remarkably like his own. Tommy's breath caught in his throat. He'd always wondered why his eyes were different from Mama's soft brown ones, but seeing Mr. McAllister up close sent a strange recognition thrilling through him. It was like looking at himself in 25 years. "You're Tommy Sullivan, aren't you?" Beau's voice was deep and warm, with the hint of a smile that transformed his serious face. "Yes, sir." Tommy's voice came out as barely a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Yes, sir, Mr. McAllister." Something flickered across Beau's expression's surprise. Then something deeper that Tommy couldn't identify. The man's hand moved unconsciously to his vest pocket, where the chain of a pocket watch glinted in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows. "How's your mother doing, son? I heard she's been under the weather." This was it. Tommy's moment. He'd rehearsed the words 100 times while lying awake at night, but now, facing the most powerful man in Cedar Ridge, they seemed inadequate and foolish. Still, Mama was counting on him, even if she didn't know it. "Mr. McAllister, sir, I was wondering if I could ask you something important." Beau set down the leather he'd been examining and gave Tommy his full attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Tommy's hands trembled as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a note he'd written and rewritten until the words were burned into his memory. But he didn't need to read it now. The desperation in his heart gave him courage. "My mama's real sick, sir," Dr. Henderson says. Tommy's voice cracked, and he swallowed hard before continuing. "He says she might not get better. And I've been thinking about what happens to me if she dies, and I don't have any family, and I thought maybe—" He took a deep breath. "Please marry my mama, Mr. McAllister. She's dying, and I don't know what else to do." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Beau's face went completely still, and Tommy watched a dozen emotions flicker across his features. Shock, pain, something that looked almost like recognition. Behind the counter, Mr. Peterson's movements had gone quiet, and Tommy realized the older man was listening to every word. Heat flushed up Tommy's neck, but he held Beau's gaze steadily. He'd come too far to back down now. Beau's hand found his pocket watch, pulling it free to worry the worn silver surface with his thumb. The engraving on the front was too faded for Tommy to make out, but whatever it said, it seemed to pain the rancher to look at it. "Tommy," Beau said carefully, "that's a mighty big thing you're asking. Marriage isn't something people do just to—" He stopped, studying the boy's face with an intensity that made Tommy squirm. "Have you talked to your mother about this?" "No, sir. Mama's too proud to ask for help, but she's scared. I can tell. She tries to hide it, but sometimes at night I hear her crying, and she doesn't think I know how sick she really is." Tommy's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for weeks. "I just want someone to take care of her, and you're the kindest man in town, and you're not married. And I thought maybe—" "Son," Beau's voice was gentle but firm, "I appreciate what you're trying to do for your mother, but these things are more complicated than you understand." Tommy felt his last hope crumbling. "Please, sir, I'll work for you. I'm strong for my age, and I'm smart. Mama says I'm the smartest boy she's ever taught. I could help with the horses, or the bookkeeping, or whatever you need. I just want my mama to have someone who cares about her." Something shifted in Beau's expression at those words. His grip tightened on the pocket watch, and for a moment Tommy thought he might say, "Yes." Then Mr. Peterson reappeared with the bottle of tonic, and the spell was broken. "Here you go, Tommy. Tell your mother this should help with the cough." Mr. Peterson's voice was unusually gentle, and he didn't mention payment. "You get on home now, son." But Tommy couldn't leave. "Not yet. Mr. McAllister, please, just think about it." Beau crouched down so they were eye level, and Tommy saw pain etched in the lines around those familiar green eyes. "Tommy, I want you to know that your mother is a fine woman, one of the finest I've ever known. But marriage, real marriage, it's based on love and choice, not just need. Do you understand?" Tommy nodded, even though he didn't really understand at all. What he understood was that the one plan he'd thought might save his mother had just failed, and he was running out of time and options. As he turned to leave, clutching the bottle of tonic Mr. Peterson had given him, Tommy heard Bo call his name softly. "Son, how long has your mother been sick?" "She started coughing blood 3 weeks ago, but she's been tired for months. Dr. Henderson says it's consumption." Tommy's voice was barely audible. Bo's face went pale. 3 weeks? He was quiet for a long moment, that pocket watch turning over and over in his hands. "Tommy, I'd like to come by and check on your mother, if that would be all right. Just as a neighbor." Hope flared in Tommy's chest. "Yes, sir, she'd like that. She always speaks kindly of you." "Does she now?" Something unreadable passed over Bo's features. "I'll be by this evening then, after your school lets out." Tommy practically floated out of the store, clutching the tonic and the first real hope he'd felt in weeks. He didn't understand why Mr. McAllister had agreed to visit, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, he could make the rancher see what Tommy saw, that Mama was worth saving, worth loving, worth fighting for. As the door closed behind him, Tommy didn't see Bo sink into a nearby chair, his hands shaking as he opened the pocket watch to reveal the faded photograph inside. A photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, taken 9 years ago in a different town, a different life. A photograph of Clara Sullivan before she was Clara Sullivan, back when Bo McAllister had thought he might spend the rest of his life trying to make her happy. The photograph had yellowed at the edges after 9 years tucked inside Bo's pocket watch, but Clara's smile remained as luminous as the day he'd convinced her to sit for the traveling photographer. She'd been reluctant, claimed she wasn't pretty enough for such extravagance, but Bo had insisted. Even then, some part of him had known their time together was borrowed, temporary as mountain snow in springtime. Now, as his horse's hooves clicked against the hard-packed dirt of Cedar Ridge's main street, that same photograph seemed to burn against his chest. Clara Bennett had become Clara Sullivan, the mysterious schoolteacher who'd arrived in town 8 years ago with a baby and no husband. The timing wasn't lost on him. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house sat at the respectable end of town, its white picket fence and tidy garden, a testament to the older woman's care for appearances. Bo had known Margaret Patterson for 15 years, ever since she'd arrived as a young widow to take over her deceased aunt's property. She was the sort of woman who collected strays, human and otherwise, with the same gentle efficiency she applied to her rose garden. The boarding house's front porch held 2 rocking chairs and a small table where Mrs. Patterson often served afternoon tea to her lodgers. Today, Tommy Sullivan sat on the porch steps, whittling at a piece of pine with more enthusiasm than skill. He looked up as Bo approached, his young face brightening with hope. "Mr. McAllister, you came." "I said I would." Bo dismounted and tied his horse to the post, taking a moment to compose himself. Seeing the boy in the afternoon light only reinforced the resemblance that had struck him so forcefully in Peterson's store. The set of Tommy's shoulders, the way he held his head, even the stubborn cowlick that refused to lie flat, it was like looking at himself as a child. "Is your mother receiving visitors?" "Yes, sir." Mrs. Patterson made her rest after school, but she's been asking about you ever since I told her you might come by. Tommy scrambled to his feet, nearly dropping his whittling project. "She's in the front parlor." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway as if summoned, her kind face creased with concern. "Mr. McAllister, how good of you to call. Clara's been having one of her better days, thank the Lord. She's been looking forward to seeing you." The emphasis on that last word told Bo that Mrs. Patterson knew more about his connection to Clara than she was letting on. The older woman had always been perceptive about matters of the heart. "Margaret." Bo touched the brim of his hat. "I appreciate you looking after them. That boy and his mother are family to me," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Have been since the day they arrived. You go on in, she's in the front parlor by the window. The afternoon light does her good." The boarding house's interior smelled of lemon oil and beeswax, with the lingering scent of whatever had been cooking for dinner. Family photographs lined the hallway walls, Mrs. Patterson's way of making her lodgers feel at home. Bo noticed several pictures of Tommy at various ages, often standing beside Clara or Mrs. Patterson with the comfortable ease of belonging. The front parlor was a cozy room with pale blue wallpaper and lace curtains that filtered the afternoon sunlight into gentle patterns on the floor. Clara sat in a wingback chair near the window, a book open in her lap and a cup of tea growing cold on the side table. She'd always been slender, but now she seemed fragile as spun glass, her cheekbones more prominent and her skin pale despite the warm light. When she looked up and saw him, her entire face transformed. The worry lines smoothed away, and for just a moment, Bo saw the young woman who'd laughed at his terrible jokes and fallen asleep in his arms during hot summer afternoons. Bo. His name was barely a whisper, but it carried 9 years of longing. "Hello, Clara." He removed his hat, suddenly feeling as awkward as a schoolboy. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Tommy mentioned you were under the weather." A soft laugh escaped her, followed by a coughing fit that lasted longer than Bo was comfortable with. When it subsided, Clara dabbed at her mouth with a handkerchief and tried to smile. "Under the weather? Is that what we're calling it?" "Clara, please, sit down. You're making me nervous, hovering there like you're ready to bolt for the door." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Though I suppose you have good reason to want to run away. You always were better at leaving than staying." The words stung because they carried more truth than accusation. Bo settled into the offered chair, his hat balanced on his knee. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Clara's eyes, still the same, warm brown he remembered, studied his face with the directness that had first attracted him to her. "You disappeared without a word, Bo. One day we were making plans, talking about the future, and the next day you were gone. Your landlady said you'd taken a job in California and left no forwarding address." The pain in her voice was carefully controlled, but Bo heard it anyway. He'd carried his own version of that pain for 9 years, along with the guilt of knowing he'd caused hers. "I got word that my father was dying. By the time I reached California, he'd been dead for 2 weeks. Bo's hands tightened on his hat brim. "I stayed to settle his affairs. And when I came back to Montana, I was gone." Clara's voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. "I looked for you, Bo. I waited as long as I could, but—" She gestured helplessly. "I was young and scared and alone, and I didn't know what else to do." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and years of misunderstanding. Outside, they could hear Tommy's voice as he chatted with Mrs. Patterson about his whittling project, his boyish enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the weight of adult regrets filling the parlor. "He's a fine boy," Bo said finally. "Tommy, you've raised him well." Clara's smile was genuine this time, transforming her wan features. "He's the light of my life, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. He gets that from—" She stopped abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "From his father?" Bo's voice was carefully neutral. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "Bo, there are things we should talk about, but not now. Not like this, with you being kind out of pity and me." Another coughing fit interrupted her words. "This isn't pity." Bo leaned forward, his voice intense. "Clara, when I saw that boy today, when he asked me to marry you—" "He what?" Clara's eyes went wide with mortification. "Oh, dear Lord, what did he say to you?" "He's scared," Bo said gently. "He loves you, and he's trying to save you the only way he knows how. Can you blame him for that?" Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. "I never wanted him to carry this burden. He's just a child. He should be thinking about fishing and schoolwork, not about what happens when I—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Without thinking, Bo reached across the small space between their chairs and covered her hands with his own. Her skin was cool and thin, but her fingers instinctively curled around his. "You're not alone in this, Clara. You don't have to be." "Yes, I do." She pulled her hands free, but gently. I've been alone for 8 years, Bo. I've gotten used to it. But you don't have to stay that way. The words came out before Bo could stop them, surprising them both with their intensity. Clara stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something he wasn't sure he was ready to give her. Finally, she shook her head. You don't understand what you're saying. There are things about my life, about Tommy complications you don't know about. Then tell me. I can't. Not yet. Clara's voice broke slightly. But I want you to know that having you here, seeing you again, it means more than I can say, even if it's only for today. The sound of Tommy's laughter drifted through the open window, followed by Mrs. Patterson's gentle correction about holding his whittling knife properly. The domestic sounds created an atmosphere of normalcy that made the conversation between Bo and Clara feel even more surreal. What if it didn't have to be just today? Bo asked quietly. Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe that boy of yours had the right idea, even if he went about it the wrong way. Bo met her eyes steadily. I never stopped thinking about you, Clara. Never stopped wondering what might have been if I'd done things differently. Bo, you don't understand. Then help me understand. He leaned forward urgently. Whatever happened between then and now, whatever brought you here, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now, and you need help, and Tommy needs someone to look after him. You're talking about marriage to a dying woman out of guilt and obligation, Clara said sadly. That's not fair to either of us. Is that what you think this is? Bo's voice carried a hint of his old intensity. Clara, I loved you once. Maybe I never stopped. Maybe that's worth building on. Before Clara could respond, Tommy burst through the parlor door, his face flushed with excitement. Mama, Mrs. Patterson says Mr. McAllister might stay for supper. Can he, please? Clara looked helplessly between her son's hopeful face and Bo's steady gaze. Tommy, Mr. McAllister is a busy man. I'd be honored to stay, Bo said quietly, if you'll have me. The smile that spread across Tommy's face was bright enough to light up the entire room. Dinner at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a revelation for Bo McAllister. He'd eaten countless meals in grand dining rooms with crystal glasses and silver service, but nothing had ever felt as warm and welcoming as the simple fare served on mismatched china around Margaret Patterson's oak table. Tommy chattered throughout the meal, his natural reserve disappearing in the comfort of familiar surroundings. He told Bo about his school lessons, his whittling projects, and his dreams of someday having a horse of his own. Clara watched her son with the gentle attention of a mother who knew she might not have many more opportunities to witness such moments of pure childhood joy. Tommy's quite the scholar, Mrs. Patterson said, passing around a platter of cornbread. Clara's taught him mathematics that would challenge boys twice his age, and his reading well. He's already working through books meant for grown folks. Is that so? Bo turned to Tommy with genuine interest. What are you reading now? Tommy's cheeks flushed with pride. Mama gave me her copy of Robinson Crusoe. It's about a man who gets shipwrecked and has to survive all alone on an island. He builds shelter and finds food and tames wild animals. The boy's eyes grew dreamy. I think it would be exciting to have such an adventure, though I wouldn't want to be away from Mama for so long. The innocence of that statement hit both adults like a physical blow. Clara's hand tightened around her water glass, and Bo found himself studying the boy's animated features with new intensity. There was intelligence there, yes, but also a depth of feeling that spoke of wisdom beyond his years. After supper, Mrs. Patterson tactfully suggested that Tommy help her with the evening chores, leaving Bo and Clara alone on the front porch as twilight settled over Cedar Ridge. The rocking chairs creaked gently in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called out its lonesome song. You're very good with him, Clara said softly. He makes it easy. Bo pulled out his pocket knife and the piece of pine he'd noticed Tommy struggling with earlier. Mind if I fix this up a bit? The boy's got enthusiasm, but his knife skills could use some work. Clara smiled. He'd love that. He's been trying to carve a horse for weeks now, but it keeps looking more like a sick cow. The wood shavings curled away under Beau's experienced hands, revealing the shape Tommy had been striving for. As he worked, Clara found herself studying his profile in the fading light. Time had been kind to Beau McAllister. The lines around his eyes spoke of laughter and hard work rather than worry, and his hands remained as steady and capable as she remembered. "Beau," Clara's voice was hesitant. "What you said earlier about marriage, did you mean it?" His hands stilled on the carving. "Every word, even knowing that I might not live to see Christmas, especially knowing that." Beau looked up from his work to meet her eyes. "Clara, I've spent 9 years wondering what might have been. If you'll have me, I'd rather spend whatever time we have left finding out what still could be." Clara was quiet for so long that Beau began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "There's something I need to tell you first. About Tommy. About why I left Montana so suddenly." She took a shaky breath. "Beau, when you disappeared, I was pregnant." The word fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. "I know." Clara's head snapped up in shock. "You know? I've got eyes, Clara. The boy looks just like I did at his age. Same stubborn cowlick, same green eyes, same way of tilting his head when he's thinking hard about something." Beau's voice was gentle but firm. "The real question is why you never told me." "Because you were gone." The words burst out of Clara with years of pent-up pain. "I waited for you, Beau. I waited until I couldn't wait anymore, and then I had to make the best choice I could for my baby. Our baby. So you came here, started over with a new name and a story about being widowed." Clara nodded miserably. "Mrs. Patterson took us in without asking too many questions. She's been more of a family to Tommy than he's ever known." "And you never thought to tell him the truth about his father?" "How could I?" Clara's voice broke. "What was I supposed to say? Your father was a good man who disappeared before you were born, and I don't know if he's alive or dead or married to someone else. I thought it was kinder to let him believe his father died heroically rather than abandoning us." Beau set down the half-finished carving and turned to face her fully. "Clara, I never abandoned you. I never even knew you were carrying my child. If I had—" "What? You would have come back and married me out of duty? Spent the rest of your life resenting the trap I'd laid for you? I would have come back and married you because I loved you," Beau said quietly. "The baby would have been a gift, not a trap." Clara stared at him through her tears. "Do you really mean that?" "With all my heart." Beau reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Clara, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after all these years, but I need you to know, losing you was the worst mistake of my life. I've regretted it every single day since." "Oh, Beau." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I've missed you so much." "Then marry me." The words came out with quiet intensity. "Not because you're sick, not because Tommy needs a father, but because we love each other. Because we've wasted enough time already, and I don't want to waste whatever time we have left." "The whole town will talk," Clara warned. "Martha Henley will have a field day with the scandal of the mysterious schoolteacher finally landing the most eligible bachelor in Cedar Ridge." "Let them talk." Beau's smile was the first genuinely happy expression Clara had seen from him all day. "I stopped caring what Martha Henley thought about my personal life years ago." "And Tommy? What do we tell him?" "We tell him the truth, that his father loves him and his mother and wants to take care of them both for as long as God allows." Beau picked up the wooden horse and resumed his careful carving. "He's a smart boy, Clara. He'll figure out the rest eventually, but for now, that's enough." Clara watched him work in the gathering darkness, his movements sure and practiced as he transformed Tommy's clumsy attempt into something recognizable. The sight of those familiar hands creating something beautiful for her son filled her with a contentment she hadn't felt in years. The carved wooden horse was a masterpiece in Tommy's 8-year-old eyes. He turned it over and over in his small hands, marveling at the smooth lines and careful details that transformed his clumsy attempt into something worthy of pride. "You made the mane look real," he breathed, running his finger along the carefully carved ridges. And look, you even put in the eyes and nostrils. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Bo felt something tight and warm settle in his chest at the boy's genuine amazement. "Your foundation was solid, son. I just helped it along a bit. Next time, I'll show you how to use the grain of the wood to your advantage." "Next time?" Tommy's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean you'll come back?" Clara and Bo exchanged a meaningful look over the boy's head. They'd spent the evening talking in careful circles around the truth, but Tommy deserved to know that his world was about to change. "Tommy," Clara said gently, "Mr. McAllister and I have something to tell you. Something important." The boy's expression grew serious, and he clutched the wooden horse tighter. "Are you going away, Mr. McAllister, because of what I asked you at the store?" "I'm sorry if I said something wrong." "No, son, you didn't say anything wrong." Bo crouched down, so he was at Tommy's eye level. "In fact, what you said got me thinking about a lot of things. About family, and taking care of people we love, and what it means to be a man." Tommy listened intently, his green eyes so like Bo's own, wide with attention. "Your mother and I have known each other for a very long time," Bo continued carefully. "We were friends before you were born, and now that we've found each other again, we've decided we'd like to be a family. If that's something you'd want too." "You mean," Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, "you want to marry Mama, for real, not just to help her?" "For real," Bo confirmed. "Because I care about her very much, and I care about you too. Would that be all right with you?" Tommy launched himself at Bo with such force that they both nearly tumbled off the porch. Small arms wrapped around Bo's neck with desperate gratitude, and the boys whispered, "Yes, yes, yes," was muffled against his shoulder. Over Tommy's head, Clara wiped tears from her eyes. The sight of her son finally having a father figure, his real father, though he didn't know it yet, filled a hollow place in her heart she'd carried for 8 years. Mrs. Patterson chose that moment to emerge from the house, her knowing smile suggesting she'd been listening from just inside the door. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "I suppose congratulations are in order. When's the wedding?" "As soon as possible," Bo said, still holding Tommy. "Given the circumstances, I don't think we need a long engagement." "This Saturday, then," Mrs. Patterson declared. "I'll speak to Pastor Williams tomorrow. Clara, dear, we'll need to get you a proper dress, and Tommy will need his hair cut. Oh, and we'll have the reception right here in the parlor. Nothing fancy, but warm and welcoming." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word of the impending marriage spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire, generating reactions that ranged from genuine happiness to barely concealed gossip. Dr. Henderson was quietly pleased, having long worried about Clara's situation. The merchants were eager to help with wedding preparations, remembering Bo's many kindnesses over the years. Martha Henley, predictably, had plenty to say about hasty marriages and convenient arrangements, but even she couldn't find fault with Bo McAllister's character or Clara's devotion to her students. On Wednesday afternoon, while Clara rested and Mrs. Patterson busied herself with wedding preparations, Bo took Tommy out to his ranch for the first time. The boy's wonder at the vast spread of land and grazing cattle was infectious, reminding Bo of his own childhood excitement at his father's ranch in California. "This is all yours?" Tommy asked, perched on the corral fence watching the horses. "It will be ours," Bo corrected gently. "Yours and your mother's and mine. Someday, if you want it, it'll be yours to run." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this overwhelming generosity. "Mr. McAllister, I mean, should I call you something else now, since you're going to be my new papa?" The word papa hit Bo like a physical blow. His own father had been a distant man, more comfortable with business than affection, and Bo had never imagined himself in that role. Now, looking at this earnest boy who was his son in every way that mattered, he felt the weight and joy of the responsibility. "Whatever feels comfortable to you, son. We have time to figure it out." "I think I'd like to call you Papa," Tommy said shyly. "If that's all right." "It's more than all right." Bo's voice was rough with emotion. "It would be an honor." They spent the afternoon exploring the ranch, with Bo pointing out the different pastures, the barn where the horses were kept, and the small bunkhouse where his hired hands lived during the busy seasons. Tommy absorbed every detail with the intensity of a child who'd never had a real home to claim. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, a modest but comfortable structure that Bo had built with his own hands 5 years earlier. "Papa?" Tommy's use of the title was still tentative. "Is Mama really going to get better now that you're marrying her?" The question broke Bo's heart. He'd been dreading it, knowing that Tommy's 8-year-old logic assumed that marriage could somehow cure consumption. "Son, your mama is very sick, Doctor. Henderson is doing everything he can, and having us to take care of her will help." But Bo struggled for words that would be honest, without crushing the boy's hope. "Sometimes people we love get sick in ways that medicine can't fix. What we can do is make sure she knows how much we love her, and that she doesn't have to worry about you being taken care of." Tommy was quiet for a long time, turning the wooden horse over in his hands. Finally, he looked up at Bo with eyes that held too much understanding for his age. "She's going to die, isn't she?" "I don't know," Bo answered honestly. "I hope not. But if she does, you won't be alone. You'll always have me and Mrs. Patterson and everyone else in town who cares about you. Your mama made sure of that by raising you to be such a fine boy." Tommy nodded solemnly, then leaned against Bo's side with the unconscious trust of a child who'd finally found safety. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "Papa?" Tommy's voice was drowsy now. "I'm glad you're going to be my father. I think Mama is too, even if she's trying not to show it." "Why do you say that?" "Because she's been humming again," Tommy said simply. "She hasn't done that since she got sick, but today, while Miss Patterson was helping her with her wedding dress, I heard her humming that song she used to sing when I was little, the one about going home." Bo tightened his arms around the boy, thinking about the woman who would soon be his wife. Clara had always hummed when she was happy. He'd forgotten that, until Tommy mentioned it. The thought that their marriage might bring her even a moment of joy made everything else seem worthwhile. As they rode back to town in the gathering darkness, Tommy chattering about all the things he wanted to show his mother at the ranch, Bo found himself praying for the first time in years. Not for miracles or divine intervention, but for time, just enough time to show Clara and Tommy how much they meant to him, and to build something lasting from the love they'd found again. The wedding dress had belonged to Mrs. Patterson's late daughter, carefully preserved in cedar and lavender for 20 years. When Margaret Patterson pulled it from its tissue-lined box, Clara gasped at the simple elegance of cream-colored silk and delicate pearl buttons. Sarah would have wanted it worn by someone who understood what love means. "Mrs. Patterson said, her voice thick with memory and determination. "She was about your size when she had no more need of it." Clara ran her fingers along the soft fabric, overwhelmed by the generosity. "Margaret, I can't possibly, this is too precious." "Nonsense. A bride needs a proper dress, and this one has been waiting for the right woman." Mrs. Patterson bustled around the boarding house's small sewing room, gathering scissors and thread. "We'll just need to take in the waist a bit and shorten the sleeves. You're smaller than Sarah was." The words carried no judgment, though they both knew Clara's increasing frailness was due to more than just her naturally slight build. The consumption had stolen the soft curves that had once filled out her dresses, leaving her angular and delicate as a bird. "Tell me about her," Clara said softly, settling into the chair by the window where the afternoon light was best for needlework. "You're Sarah." Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled on the dress fabric. She was 19 when the fever took her. Engaged to a fine young man from Billings, full of plans for their future together. A sad smile crossed the older woman's face. She would have been a wonderful mother. Had such patience with children, always bringing home stray kittens and wounded birds to nurse back to health. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I can't imagine losing a child. No parent should have to." Mrs. Patterson picked up her sewing again with determined efficiency. "But Sarah's gone, and you're here, and that dress deserves to see another wedding. Besides, I have a feeling she'd approve of this match. She always did love a good love story." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Mrs. Patterson's experienced hands making quick work of the alterations, while Clara helped by sorting buttons and ribbon. Through the open window, they could hear Tommy's laughter from the yard, where he was helping Bo load wedding supplies into the wagon. "Clara, dear," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, not looking up from her stitching, "are you sure about this? Marriage is a big step, especially given everything." "You mean given that I'm dying?" Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled. "I mean given that you and Bo have a complicated history, and Tommy's involved now, and emotions are running high. Sometimes when we're scared, we make decisions with our hearts instead of our heads." Clara was quiet for a long moment, considering the older woman's words. Mrs. Patterson had been more mother to her than her own mother had ever been, and her concern came from a place of genuine love. "I loved him before, Margaret, completely and without reservation. When he disappeared, it nearly broke me." Clara's voice was soft but steady. "I spent 8 years building a life without him, learning to be independent, raising Tommy on my own. I'm not the same scared girl who left Montana with a broken heart. And now I love him differently, not with the desperate passion of youth, but with the understanding that comes from loss and loneliness and finding someone again when you thought that chance was gone forever." Clara touched her throat, where her wedding ring would soon rest. "I know this might be short-lived. I know I might not live to see Tommy grow up, but whatever time we have, I want to spend it as a family." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a woman who knows her own mind. And Bo? He's not the same either. More settled, more thoughtful. He looks at Tommy and sees—" Clara paused, not quite ready to voice the truth about Tommy's parentage, even to her closest friend. "He sees a boy who needs a father, and he wants to be that for him. Even if the worst happens, Tommy will have someone." "That boy already loves him," Mrs. Patterson observed. "Follows him around like a devoted puppy, hanging on every word. Yesterday I caught Tommy practicing walking like Bo, trying to match his stride." Clara smiled through sudden tears. "Tommy's never had a father figure before. Oh, Dr. Henderson has been kind, and Mr. Peterson always treats him well, but this is different. Bo makes time for him, really listens when he talks. Do you know he's teaching Tommy to whittle properly and to ride? Tommy's been begging for riding lessons for years. And how does it make you feel, seeing them together?" The question hit deeper than Mrs. Patterson probably intended. Clara had been trying not to examine her feelings too closely, afraid of what she might find. But watching Bo and Tommy together stirred emotions she'd thought safely buried. "Grateful," Clara said finally, "and guilty. Tommy should have had this from the beginning. He should have grown up knowing his father, having that bond, that security. Instead, I kept them apart because I was too proud and too scared to fight for what we should have had. Clara Sullivan, you listen to me." Mrs. Patterson's voice carried the authority of 20 years of caring for lost souls. "You did the best you could with the information you had. You were young and alone and scared, and you made choices to protect your baby. Don't you dare waste energy on regret when you should be focused on joy." Through the window, they heard Bo's deep laugh, followed by Tommy's delighted giggle. Whatever they were doing in the yard had both of them in good spirits. "He's going to be a wonderful father," Clara said wistfully. "He already is," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Have you seen the way he looks at that boy? Like he can't quite believe his good fortune. And Tommy, well, Tommy's practically glowing with happiness. It's like watching a flower turn toward the sun." That evening, after Tommy had been tucked into bed with his new wooden horse and stories of tomorrow's wedding, Clara sat on the front porch with Bo, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. "Are you having second thoughts?" Bo asked quietly, noting her unusual silence. "No," Clara said immediately, then smiled at her own vehemence. "No, I'm not having second thoughts. I'm having, what would you call them, last thoughts, I suppose. Last thoughts about what? About the woman I was before, and the woman I'm about to become. Clara pulled her shawl closer against the evening chill. Tomorrow, I'll be Clara McAllister instead of Clara Sullivan. I'll be a wife again, and Tommy will have a father. Everything will be different. Are you afraid of different? Clara considered the question seriously. I used to be. For 8 years, I've been afraid of change, of taking risks, of hoping for too much. But sitting here with you, knowing that tomorrow we'll be a family, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm just grateful. Bo reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers with the ease of long familiarity. I've been thinking about names. Names? For Tommy. He'll be Tommy McAllister after tomorrow, but I was wondering, would you consider letting me adopt him formally, make it legal and official? Clara's breath caught. She'd expected this conversation eventually, but not so soon, not so directly. The implications were enormous and wonderful. Bo, you don't understand what you're offering. I understand perfectly. His voice was firm but gentle. I'm offering to be that boy's father in every way that matters, not just for as long as you're here, but forever. He's a remarkable child, Clara, smart and kind and brave, everything a man could want in a son. Even if Clara couldn't finish the sentence, even if you're not here to see him grow up, yes, he'll always be my son, and this will always be his home. Bo squeezed her hand gently. I know it's a big decision, and we don't have to decide tonight, but I wanted you to know that I'm thinking long-term, not just about the next few months. Clara was quiet for so long that Bo began to worry he'd overstepped. Finally, she spoke in a voice thick with emotion. Yes, yes, yes. I want you to adopt Tommy. I want him to be Tommy McAllister, to know he belongs somewhere, to have a father who chose him. Clara turned to face Bo fully. I can't think of anything that would make me happier than knowing my son will carry your name and your love for the rest of his life. The kiss they shared was soft and sweet, flavored with tears of joy and the promise of tomorrows that might be numbered but would be filled with love. The wedding was everything Clara had dreamed of, and nothing like she'd expected. Mrs. Patterson's parlour had been transformed with late-season wildflowers and borrowed lace, creating an intimate sanctuary where their small gathering of friends could witness the joining of two lives that had taken 8 years to find each other again. Pastor Williams kept the ceremony brief but meaningful, his weathered face kind as he spoke about the mysterious ways that love perseveres through separation and sorrow. Tommy stood beside Bo as his best man, the wooden horse tucked safely in his pocket and his face glowing with pride as he watched his mother marry the man who would become his father. The moment that would haunt Clara's memory came during the exchange of vows, when Bo looked into her eyes and promised to love her for whatever time God grants us, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. His voice broke slightly on those last words, and Clara saw her own desperate hope reflected in his green eyes. They were pronounced husband and wife at sunset, golden light streaming through Mrs. Patterson's lace curtains as Bo kissed his bride with gentle reverence. The small gathering, Dr. Henderson, the Petersons from the general store, Mrs. Patterson, and several of Clara's teaching colleagues applauded warmly, but Clara barely heard them. All she could focus on was the solid warmth of her husband's hands and the incredible reality that she was no longer alone. The reception was a modest affair of cake and coffee, with Mrs. Patterson's famous apple cider and enough laughter to fill the small parlour. Tommy charmed everyone with his earnest toast, to Mama and Papa, and being a real family, and even Martha Henley managed to offer grudging congratulations when she stopped by to deliver a wedding gift of hand-embroidered pillowcases. It was nearly 10 o'clock when the last guest departed, leaving the new family to themselves in the quiet boarding house. Tommy had fallen asleep in Bo's arms during the final hour of celebration, worn out by excitement and too much cake. "I'll carry him up to bed," Bo whispered, but Clara stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. "Wait." I want to remember this, all of us together, him trusting you completely, looking so peaceful and happy. Clara's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all day. It's perfect. Bo shifted Tommy's slight weight, marveling at how naturally the boy had curled against his chest. He's gotten heavier, he murmured with paternal pride. Good food and feeling secure, it makes a difference. They carried Tommy upstairs together, Clara turning down the covers while Bo gently removed the boy's good shoes and Sunday shirt. Tommy barely stirred as they tucked him in, his small hand instinctively reaching for the wooden horse on his nightstand. Sleep well, my darling, Clara whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Tomorrow we start our new life. It was as they were tiptoeing out of Tommy's room that they heard the commotion downstairs, urgent voices and heavy footsteps that had no business disturbing the peaceful evening. McAllister, Bo McAllister, you in there? The voice belonged to Jake Morrison, one of Bo's ranch hands, and it carried a note of panic that sent both newlyweds hurrying toward the stairs. They found Jake in the parlor with Mrs. Patterson, his hat in his hands, and his face grim with bad news. Behind him stood Sheriff Coleman, his expression equally serious. "Jake, what's wrong?" Bo immediately went to his foreman, noting the man's obvious distress. "Boss, I hate to interrupt your wedding night, but we got big trouble out at the ranch. That storm we had 3 days ago, it washed out more than just the creek crossing. Found something this morning. When we was checking the damage down by Willow Bend." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his voice gentle but official. "Bo, we need to talk. All of us. Mrs. McAllister too." Clara felt cold, dread settle in her stomach. "What is it? What's happened?" "Ma'am, when the creek flooded, it carved out a new channel near your husband's south pasture, exposed some things that had been buried for a long time." The sheriff's weathered hands worked his hat brim nervously. "We found remains, ma'am, human remains, along with some personal effects that we've been able to identify." Bo went very still. "Who?" "James Bennett," Sheriff Coleman said quietly, "based on the clothing and a pocket watch we found with the body. James Bennett, who disappeared from Willow Creek 9 years ago, right around the time Clara here would have been—" He glanced apologetically at Clara, "right around the time she would have been Clara Bennett, before she came to Cedar Ridge." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her like a physical blow. James Bennett, her husband, her first husband, whose death she'd fabricated to explain her unmarried state to the people of Cedar Ridge. Except James Bennett hadn't died in a mining accident as she'd claimed. James Bennett had been murdered, buried in an unmarked grave on what would eventually become Bo McAllister's land. "Clara?" Bo's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Clara, what is this about?" She looked at her husband of 3 hours, seeing confusion and growing concern in his eyes, and realized that the beautiful new life they'd just begun was about to crumble around them. Because James Bennett hadn't just been her fabricated first husband, he'd been her real first husband, the violent drunk who'd made her life hell for 6 months before disappearing into the night, leaving her pregnant and alone. The husband she'd been legally married to when she'd fallen in love with Bo McAllister 9 years ago. The husband whose murder now made her a widow in truth, but also potentially made her marriage to Bo illegal, and possibly made one of them a suspect in a 9-year-old killing. "I need to sit down," Clara whispered, swaying on her feet. Bo immediately moved to support her, but she could feel the questions radiating from him like heat from a forge. Mrs. Patterson bustled forward with a chair and a glass of water, her face pale, but determined to maintain normalcy in the face of crisis. "Sheriff," Bo said carefully, "are you saying that Clara was married to this James Bennett?" "Legally married, yes, sir. We found the marriage certificate among the effects, along with some letters addressed to Mrs. James Bennett." Sheriff Coleman's voice was professionally neutral, but Clara could see the sympathy in his eyes. "What we need to understand is how Miss Bennett ended up dead and buried on your land, and why Clara here told everyone she was a widow when, as far as we knew, her husband had just disappeared. Clara found her voice, though it came out cracked and small. Because I thought he had disappeared. James left one night in a drunken rage, and I never saw him again. I had no idea. She looked helplessly between her new husband and the sheriff. I had no idea he was dead. I certainly had no idea he was buried on Beau's land. But you told people he was dead, Jake said, not unkindly. Told them you was a widow. Because I was trying to protect my son, Clara said, her voice growing stronger. James Bennett was a violent man who drank away every penny we had and raised his hand to me more than once. When he disappeared, I was grateful. I waited 6 months to make sure he wasn't coming back, and then I created a new life for Tommy and myself. I said James was dead because I needed him to be dead. The room was silent except for the ticking of Mrs. Patterson's mantel clock. Finally, Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. Mrs. McAllister, I'm going to need you to come down to the office tomorrow and make a formal statement about your relationship with James Bennett and the circumstances of his disappearance. And Beau, he looked apologetically at his friend. I'm going to need to search your ranch records, see if there's any indication of how that body ended up on your land. Of course, Beau said automatically, but Clara could see the wheels turning in his mind. Sheriff, are we talking about a murder investigation? Hard to say until Doc Henderson examines the remains, but a man doesn't bury himself, and that grave was definitely meant to stay hidden. Sheriff Coleman settled his hat back on his head. For now, nobody's under arrest, but this situation is going to require some careful sorting out. After the sheriff and Jake left, the 3 adults sat in Mrs. Patterson's parlor, the wedding decorations looking incongruous in the face of their new reality. Clara, Beau said finally, his voice carefully controlled, I need you to tell me everything about James Bennett, about your marriage to him, about what really happened 9 years ago. Clara looked at her husband, her possibly illegal husband, and realized that the truth she'd hidden for 9 years was about to destroy everything she'd fought so hard to build, including, quite possibly, the man she loved and the son who finally had a father. It's a long story, she whispered. We have time, Beau replied, but Clara wasn't sure that was true anymore. Time, it seemed, might be the one thing they were about to run out of completely. Clara's story came out in halting pieces, punctuated by coughing fits that left her breathless, and Beau's increasingly tense questions. Mrs. Patterson sat quietly in the corner, her knitting needles clicking steadily as she worked on a baby blanket for one of the church ladies, offering silent support through her presence. I met James Bennett in Willow Creek when I was 17, Clara began, her voice barely above a whisper. He was handsome and charming when he was sober, and he convinced my father that he could provide for me. Papa had 6 daughters and limited means, so when James asked for my hand, she shrugged helplessly. It seemed like a good match. Beau's hands clenched into fists on his knees, but he remained silent, letting her tell the story at her own pace. The problems started on our wedding night. James had been drinking to celebrate, and when he drank, he became someone else entirely. Mean, violent. The kind of man who took his frustrations out on anyone smaller than himself. Clara's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where Beau could now see the faint white line of an old scar. For 6 months, I lived in fear. James would disappear for days at a time, drinking and gambling away our money, then come home angry and looking for someone to blame. Clara, Beau said gently, why didn't you leave him? Where would I go? My father had made it clear that marriage was for life, that a woman's duty was to submit to her husband regardless of circumstances. And James was careful he never hit me where it would show, never in front of witnesses. To the outside world, we looked like a normal young couple. Clara's voice grew bitter. Besides, by the 3rd month, I knew I was carrying a baby, James's baby, or so I thought. Mrs. Patterson's knitting needles paused for just a moment before resuming their steady rhythm. She alone knew the full truth about Tommy's parentage, and Clara felt grateful for her discretion. "What changed?" Bo asked. "James found out about a poker game in the next county high stakes, the kind of game that could either make a man rich or cost him everything he had. He'd been saving money for weeks, stealing from our household funds and selling anything of value we owned." Clara's eyes grew distant with memory. "The night before he planned to leave, he came home drunk and angry, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He'd lost the money he'd been saving in a smaller game, and he blamed me for it somehow. Said I was bad luck, said the baby would probably be cursed too." Bo's jaw tightened, but he remained quiet, sensing that Clara needed to get through this at her own pace. "He hit me harder than ever before, and when I fell I started bleeding. I was so scared I was going to lose the baby that I—" Clara's voice broke. "I fought back. I grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace and hit him with it. Not hard enough to kill him, just enough to make him stop hitting me." "Good for you," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, speaking for the first time since the story began. James was stunned more than hurt, but it enraged him completely. He said he was going to the poker game anyway, and when he came back, he was going to teach me a lesson I'd never forget. Said he was going to make sure I never raised a hand to him again. Clara shivered despite the warm room. He left that night in a fury, taking what little money we had left and his father's pistol. I never saw him again. "But you didn't report him missing," Bo observed. "Report him missing to who? The sheriff in Willow Creek was James's drinking buddy, and half the town owed James money from his gambling. Besides, I was terrified he'd come back, and I was grateful for every day he didn't." Clara met Bo's eyes steadily. "I waited 6 months for him to return, and when he didn't, I assumed he'd either gotten himself killed in that poker game or found some other town to terrorize. Either way, I was free." "So you left Willow Creek," Bo said. "I left everything. Changed my name from Clara Bennett to Clara Sullivan. Sullivan was my mother's maiden name. Invented a story about a husband who died in a mining accident and came to Cedar Ridge to start over." Clara's voice grew stronger. "I wasn't proud of the lies, but I was proud of building a life for Tommy, of becoming someone respectable, someone who could hold her head up in church and teach other people's children." The three of them sat in silence for a long moment, processing the full implications of Clara's revelation. Finally, Bo spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Did you kill James Bennett?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Clara looked directly into her husband's eyes, and Bo saw no deception there, only pain and exhaustion. "No. I hit him with the poker that one time, but it wasn't enough to do serious damage. He was drunk and surprised, but he was very much alive when he left our house that night." Clara's voice was firm despite her obvious fatigue. "I have no idea how he ended up dead on your land, Bo. I swear to you on Tommy's life I didn't kill my first husband." Bo nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I believe you. Do you?" Clara asked, studying his face intently. "Even knowing that our marriage might not be legal, even knowing that this investigation could drag your name through the mud and associate you with murder?" "Clara McAllister," Bo said firmly, "you are my wife in every way that matters. Legal technicalities don't change how I feel about you or my commitment to you and Tommy. As for my reputation, let people talk. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not capable of murder." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat gently. "If you'll forgive an old woman's interference, there are some practical matters we should discuss. The sheriff will be back tomorrow with more questions, and word of this is going to spread through town faster than wildfire. You'll need to decide how much to tell Tommy, and you'll need to prepare for some unpleasant gossip. Martha Henley is going to have a field day," Clara said miserably. "The mysterious schoolteacher with her scandalous past, married to a man whose land harbors murder victims. She'll have the whole town convinced I'm a black widow by Sunday service." "Let Martha talk," Bo said dismissively. "The people who matter know your character. Dr. Henderson, the Petersons, Pastor Williams, They're not going to turn their backs on you because of something that happened 9 years ago. But what about Tommy? Clara's voice cracked with worry. He's going to hear things at school, cruel things about his mother being married to 2 men, about his new father being involved in a murder investigation. Children can be so cruel when they don't understand. Then we make sure he understands, Bo said firmly. We tell him an age-appropriate version of the truth that you were married before to a bad man who disappeared and that you thought he was dead when you married me. We emphasize that none of this is his fault and that our family is strong enough to weather whatever gossip comes our way. The conversation was interrupted by soft footsteps on the stairs. Tommy appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking confused by the late-night gathering. Mama, Papa, why is everyone still awake? Did something happen? Clara and Bo exchanged a look, and Clara could see the same thought in her husband's eyes. How much should they tell him now, and how much should they wait until morning? Come here, sweetheart, Clara said, opening her arms to her son. Tommy climbed into her lap, still warm and drowsy from sleep. We were just having some grown-up conversation, but it's nothing for you to worry about. But you look sad, Mama, and you too, Papa. Tommy's perceptive green eyes moved between his parents. Is it because of the wedding? Are you sorry you got married? Oh, my darling boy, no. Clara hugged him tightly. Today was the happiest day of my life, marrying your papa and making us a real family. Sometimes grown-ups have to discuss complicated things, but that doesn't mean we're unhappy. Tommy considered this, then looked at Bo with the directness of childhood. Papa, are you going to stay with us even if complicated things happen? The simple question cut straight to the heart of everyone's fears. Bo moved closer and placed his hand on Tommy's back, his voice steady and sure. Son, I made promises to your mother today in front of God and our friends. I promised to love her and take care of both of you, no matter what happens. A man's word is the most important thing he has, and I give you my word I'm not going anywhere. Tommy nodded solemnly, accepting this assurance with the faith of a child who had finally found security. Good. I was afraid maybe you'd change your mind about wanting to be my papa. Never, Bo said with quiet intensity. You're my son now, Tommy McAllister, and nothing in this world could make me stop wanting that. After Tommy was settled back in bed with renewed promises that everything would be all right, the adults returned to their difficult conversation. We need to think about the legal implications, Mrs. Patterson said practically. If Clara was legally married to James Bennett when she married you, Bo, then today's ceremony might not be valid in the eyes of the law. But James is dead, Clara protested. Doesn't that make me a widow regardless of when he died? Probably, but there might be complications. You'll need to speak with a lawyer as well as the sheriff. Mrs. Patterson set down her knitting and fixed them both with a serious look. There's also the matter of how James Bennett's body ended up on Bo's land. Someone put it there, and the sheriff is going to want to know who. Bo had been quiet during this exchange, his mind working through the implications. Now he looked up with a frown. I bought that land from old Pete Morrison about 7 years ago, after he decided ranching was too much work for a man his age. Before that, it had been part of the Morrison spread for 30 years. So if James Bennett was buried there 9 years ago, it would have been on Pete's land, not yours, Clara said, hope creeping into her voice. That's right, but Pete's been in poor health for the past few years. His mind comes and goes. Even if he knew something about how that body got there, I'm not sure he'd be able to remember or explain it clearly. Mrs. Patterson frowned. Wasn't Pete Morrison the one who used to hire drifters and gamblers for seasonal work? Back in the old days, I mean, before his wife made him stop because of all the trouble they caused. That's right, Bo said slowly. Pete always said he didn't care about a man's past as long as he could work cattle. Got him in trouble more than once with men who turned out to be running from the law. The implications of this hung heavy in the room. If James Bennett had made his way to the Morrison Ranch 9 years ago, possibly after losing at that poker game, Clara had mentioned he might have encountered someone else with violence in their past. We need to talk to Pete, Clara said. "If he's having good days and bad days, we should try to catch him when his mind is clear. I'll go see him tomorrow, after we deal with the sheriff," Bo agreed. "Pete's always been straight with me. If he knows anything about what happened, he'll tell me." But what if... Clara started to voice her worst fear, then stopped. "What if what?" Bo prompted gently. "What if whoever killed James is still around? What if they find out the body's been discovered and decide that anyone asking questions is a threat?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "Bo, I couldn't bear it if something happened to you or Tommy because of my past." Bo moved to kneel beside Clara's chair, taking her hands in his larger ones. "Clara, listen to me. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to find out what happened to James Bennett, clear our names, and put this whole mess behind us. But most importantly, we're going to protect our family while we're doing it." "How?" "By being smart, being careful, and trusting each other completely." Bo's voice carried the quiet authority that had made him successful in business and respected in the community. "Tomorrow, you'll give your statement to the sheriff, and I'll talk to Pete Morrison. We'll get a lawyer involved if we need to, and we'll make sure Tommy is safe and protected from gossip. And if the investigation drags on, if people start avoiding the schoolteacher who might be a murderer and the rancher whose land hides bodies, then we'll weather it together," Bo said simply. "Clara, I didn't marry you today because life was going to be easy. I married you because I love you, and I want to face whatever comes next as your husband. A 9-year-old murder mystery doesn't change that." Mrs. Patterson smiled approvingly from her corner chair. "That's the spirit. Now, I suggest you both try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and you'll need your strength for whatever it brings." As they prepared to retire to their separate rooms, Mrs. Patterson's sense of propriety hadn't completely abandoned her. Despite the circumstances, Clara caught Bo's arm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me, for standing by me, for not running when things got complicated." "Clara," Bo said, cupping her face gently in his hands, "I spent 9 years running from the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not making that mistake again." The kiss they shared was tender but brief, shadowed by uncertainty, but anchored by their commitment to each other and to the family they'd fought so hard to create. Neither of them slept well that night, but they faced the dawn together, ready to fight for the life they'd built and the son who depended on them both. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and tobacco, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of too many difficult conversations held within its walls. Clara sat in a hard wooden chair across from Sheriff Coleman's desk, her wedding dress replaced by a simple brown skirt and white blouse that made her look even more fragile than usual. Bo sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring despite the gravity of their situation. He'd insisted on accompanying her, both as her husband and as a witness to ensure her rights were protected. "Now, Mrs. McAllister," Sheriff Coleman began, his voice carefully neutral, "I want you to tell me again about the last time you saw James Bennett alive." Clara took a shaky breath and repeated the story she'd told the night before, adding details as the sheriff prompted her with specific questions. How long had James been gone on his drinking binges? Had he ever mentioned enemies or people who might want to harm him? Had she seen him with large amounts of money? "The night he left, he took his father's pistol," Clara said. "It was a Colt revolver, silver-plated with ivory grips. James was proud of it, said it was the only thing his father left him, besides debts and bad memories." Sheriff Coleman made notes on his pad. "And you're certain he was alive when he left your house that night?" "Absolutely certain. He was drunk and angry, but very much alive. He told me he was going to that poker game, and when he came back, he was going to—" Clara's voice faltered. "He was going to hurt me worse than he ever had before. But he never came back." "No. I waited 6 months, expecting him to return any day, and when he didn't, well, I assumed he'd gotten himself killed, gambling or drinking, or maybe just moved on to terrorize someone else." Clara met the sheriff's eyes steadily. "I was grateful he was gone," Sheriff Coleman. "I won't lie about that, but I didn't kill him." The sheriff nodded, his expression suggesting he believed her. "Mrs. McAllister, I have to ask, is there anyone else who might have wanted James Bennett dead? Anyone who had reason to fear him or hate him?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. James owed money to a lot of people. He gambled constantly and wasn't always honest about paying his debts. There was a man named Snake Morrison, no relation to Pete Morrison, just an unfortunate nickname, who came to our house twice looking for money. James owed him. He was frightening, the kind of man who enjoyed hurting people. "Snake Morrison," the sheriff repeated, writing the name down. "Anyone else?" "There was also the matter of Emma Walsh." Clara's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "James wasn't faithful to me, Sheriff. He had a relationship with Emma while we were married. Her husband found out and confronted James about it. There was a fight in the saloon, and Mr. Walsh said he'd kill James if he ever went near his wife again." Sheriff Coleman looked up from his notes. "When was this fight?" "About 2 weeks before James disappeared. It was the talk of the town. Tom Walsh is normally such a mild-mannered man, but he was beside himself with rage over the betrayal." The sheriff made more notes, then leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. McAllister, I want to be straight with you. The condition of the remains makes it difficult to determine exactly how James Bennett died, but Dr. Henderson found what appears to be a bullet hole in the skull. Given that, and the fact that the body was buried in secret, we're treating this as a murder investigation." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "A bullet hole." "Yes, ma'am, which means someone shot your first husband and then buried him to hide the crime." The sheriff's voice was gentle but firm. "Now, you say James had his father's pistol with him when he left. Was that the only gun he owned?" "As far as I know, yes. James wasn't much of a hunter, and we couldn't afford multiple firearms." "Did you ever fire that pistol, Mrs. McAllister?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun itself. Clara felt Beau's hand close over hers, offering silent support. "Once," Clara admitted quietly. "James tried to teach me to shoot it, said a woman should know how to protect herself. But I was a terrible shot, and the noise frightened me. I never touched it again after that one lesson." Sheriff Coleman nodded and closed his notebook. "Mrs. McAllister, I appreciate your cooperation. You're free to go for now, but I may have more questions as the investigation continues. I'll also need to speak with your husband about the land where the body was found." As they left the sheriff's office, Clara leaned heavily on Beau's arm, exhaustion and stress taking their toll on her already fragile health. "How did I do?" she asked quietly. "You did fine," Beau assured her. "You told the truth, and that's all anyone can ask." They were walking toward their wagon when a familiar voice called out behind them. "Well, well, if it isn't the new Mrs. McAllister." They turned to see Martha Henley approaching, her sharp features arranged in an expression of false sympathy that fooled no one. "Martha," Beau said coolly. "Good morning. Such a shame about your wedding day being spoiled by all this unpleasantness." Martha continued, her eyes glittering with malicious curiosity. "I hear the sheriff found a body on your land, Beau, and that it might be connected to Clara's mysterious past." "I'm sure you've heard a great deal, Martha," Beau replied evenly. "Most of it probably inaccurate." "Oh, I don't know about that. Word is that Clara here was married before to the man they found dead. Makes a person wonder what other secrets she might be hiding." Martha's smile was sharp as a blade. "After all, we never did find out who fathered that boy of hers." Clara stiffened, and Beau stepped protectively closer to her side. "Martha, I suggest you be very careful about spreading gossip that could damage innocent people's reputations." "Innocent?" Martha's laugh was harsh. "Beau, you always were too trusting for your own good. That woman has been lying to this town for 8 years, and now we find out she might be connected to murder. How innocent could she be?" Before Beau could respond, Clara found her voice. "Mrs. Henley," she said quietly but firmly, "I understand that this situation provides you with excellent material for gossip, but I would ask you to remember that there's a child involved." Tommy doesn't deserve to be hurt by adult complications he had nothing to do with. That boy is going to hear plenty worse than gossip before this is over, Martha replied coldly. Maybe you should have thought about protecting him before you brought murder and scandal to our peaceful town. That's enough. Beau's voice carried a tone of authority that made Martha step back involuntarily. Mrs. Henley, my wife has cooperated fully with the sheriff's investigation, and we've done nothing wrong. I suggest you focus on your own affairs and let the law handle ours. Martha's face flushed with anger at being dismissed so firmly, but she couldn't quite bring herself to challenge Beau McAllister directly. Instead, she turned her venom back toward Clara. Mark my words, Clara Sullivan or Clara Bennett, or whatever your real name is, the truth has a way of coming out eventually. And when it does, I doubt even your wealthy husband will be able to protect you from the consequences. With that parting shot, Martha swept away, leaving Clara trembling with suppressed emotion. Don't let her get to you, Beau said gently, helping Clara into the wagon. Martha Henley has been stirring up trouble in this town for 20 years. Most people take whatever she says with a grain of salt. But what if she's right? Clara asked miserably. What if the truth does come out, and it's worse than we think? What if whoever killed James decides we know too much? Beau settled beside her on the wagon seat and took the reins in his hands. Then we'll face it together. Clara, we can't live our lives in fear of what might happen. We have to trust that the truth will set us free, not destroy us. As they drove toward the Morrison ranch to speak with Pete about his memories of 9 years ago, Clara found herself praying that her husband's faith in truth and justice would prove stronger than her own, growing fear that some secrets were too dangerous to uncover. Pete Morrison's ranch sat in a valley between two gentle hills, its buildings weathered but well-maintained, despite the old man's failing health. Smoke rose from the chimney of the small cabin where Pete had lived alone since his wife's death 3 years earlier, and the sight of their wagon approaching brought him out onto his front porch. At 72, Pete Morrison was still a formidable figure, tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and eyes that alternated between sharp awareness and confused uncertainty. Today, thankfully, those eyes were alert and focused as he recognized his visitors. Beau, good to see you, son. Pete's weathered face creased into a welcoming smile. And this must be the new Mrs. McAllister I've been hearing about. Congratulations on your wedding. Thank you, Pete. Beau helped Clara down from the wagon, noting how the older man's gaze lingered on her face with something that might have been recognition. We were hoping we could talk with you about something important. Of course. Come inside where it's warm. Martha's been gone so long now, I don't often have visitors. Pete led them into his cozy cabin, gesturing for them to sit at his kitchen table while he poured coffee from a pot that had been keeping warm on the stove. Clara accepted her cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The morning's events had left her feeling chilled to the bone, and Pete's simple hospitality was a welcome contrast to Martha Henley's venom. Pete, Beau began carefully, you heard about what they found down by Willow Bend after the flood? The old man's expression grew somber. Jake Morrison told me, and before you ask, no, we're not related despite the name. Said they found human remains buried on what used to be my south pasture. Been wondering when someone would come asking about that. You were expecting this conversation? Clara asked, surprised by Pete's matter-of-fact tone. Pete studied her face intently for a long moment. You look familiar. Young lady, different somehow, but familiar. Got the feeling I've seen you before, though I can't quite place where. Clara felt her heart begin to race. Mr. Morrison, my name is Clara. Clara McAllister now, but 9 years ago I was Clara Bennett. My first husband was James Bennett. Recognition dawned in Pete's eyes. James Bennett. Yes, I remember James Bennett. Came to me looking for work about, 9 years ago now. Said he was down on his luck, needed to earn some money fast, had a terrible temper and a worse drinking problem. You hired him? Beau asked. For about 2 weeks. James was a decent worker when he was sober, but he couldn't stay sober long enough to be useful. got into fights with the other men, stole from the bunkhouse, and generally made life miserable for everyone. Pete's expression darkened. Final straw came when he pulled a gun on one of my best hands over a card game. Silver-plated Colt, fancy thing with ivory grips. I told him to pack up and get off my land. Clara leaned forward urgently. "Pete, this is very important. When James left your ranch, was he alive?" "Oh, he was alive, all right. Madder than a wet cat and swearing revenge, but very much alive." Pete sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Problem was, he didn't leave alone." "What do you mean?" Beau's voice was tense. "Well, that's the thing. James had been thick as thieves with another drifter I'd hired fellow called Snake Morrison. Real name was Samuel, but everyone called him Snake on account of a long scar across his cheek that wiggled when he talked. Snake was everything James was, only worse, meaner, more violent, completely without conscience." Clara felt cold, dread settle in her stomach. "Snake Morrison. I told Sheriff Coleman about him. James owed him money, and he came to our house looking for it." "That sounds right. Snake was the type to hold a grudge, and he didn't forgive debts easily." Pete's voice grew troubled. "When I fired James, Snake quit too. Said they had business to settle. I figured they were planning some kind of job together, robbery, maybe, or a crooked card game. I was just grateful to have them both off my property." "Did you see them leave together?" Beau asked. "That's where things get interesting." Pete refilled their coffee cups, his movements deliberate as he organized his memories. "They left together, all right, but they came back that same night. I saw them from my bedroom window, two men on horseback, one of them carrying something heavy across his saddle. At the time, I figured they'd stolen something and were using my land to hide it." "Why didn't you investigate?" Clara asked. Pete's laugh was harsh. "Young lady, you don't survive as long as I have by sticking your nose into other people's violent business. Snake Morrison was the kind of man who'd kill you for looking at him wrong. I figured whatever they were burying out there in my south pasture was their concern, not mine." "But you knew they buried something?" Beau's voice was carefully controlled. "I knew they dug a hole and put something in it, yes. Next morning, they were both gone, Snake and James both. I never saw either one of them again." Pete met Clara's eyes directly. "Until now, seeing you, I'd wondered sometimes what became of James Bennett. Now I guess I know." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications of Pete's story. Finally, Clara found her voice. "Mr. Morrison, are you saying you think Snake Morrison killed James and buried him on your land?" "I'm saying Snake Morrison was capable of murder, and James Bennett had a way of making enemies. If James owed Snake money and couldn't pay, or if they had a falling out over whatever scheme they were planning." Pete shrugged. "Snake wouldn't have hesitated to put a bullet in him and hide the evidence." "But why bury him on your land?" Beau asked. "That seems risky. Not if you think about it from Snake's perspective. He knew I minded my own business, and he probably figured the body would never be found way out there in the pasture. Besides, it was convenient they were already there. It was dark, and Snake could disappear into the night afterward." Clara's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "If Snake Morrison killed James, where is he now? What if he finds out the body's been discovered?" Pete's expression grew grave. "That's what worries me, Mrs. McAllister. Snake Morrison is the type to tie up loose ends, and if he thinks anyone can connect him to that killing, he might come after Clara." Beau finished, his voice grim. "Pete, do you have any idea where Snake might have gone after that night?" "Could be anywhere by now. Men like Snake don't stay in one place long, too many people looking for them, too many crimes following in their wake." Pete paused. "But I'll tell you this, if Snake Morrison is still alive, and if he finds out that body's been discovered, he won't just run. He'll come back to eliminate anyone who might be able to identify him." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the steady tick of Pete's mantel clock. Clara found herself thinking about Tommy, safe at school, but potentially in danger if Snake Morrison decided to target their family. "We need to tell Sheriff Coleman about this immediately," Beau said, standing. "Pete, would you be willing to make a statement about what you saw that night?" "Course I will. Should have done it years ago." But I was younger and more foolish then. Thought staying out of other people's business was the safest course. Pete's eyes were sad but determined. Now I see that sometimes staying silent just lets evil flourish. As they prepared to leave, Pete caught Clara's arm gently. "Mrs. McAllister, I want you to know I remember James Bennett, and I remember the kind of man he was. If Snake Morrison killed him, it wasn't any great loss to the world. But that doesn't mean you and your family should pay the price for it now." "Thank you," Clara whispered, touched by the old man's unexpected kindness. "You be careful," Pete warned, as they climbed back into their wagon. "And Bo, you keep that family of yours close until this is resolved. Snake Morrison is the devil himself, and if he's coming back to Cedar Ridge, innocent folks are going to get hurt." As they drove away from Pete's ranch, Clara felt the weight of impending danger settling over her like a shroud. Somewhere out there, a killer might be learning that his 9-year-old secret had been discovered. And when he came looking for answers or revenge, Clara and her family would be right in his path. 3 weeks later, Clara McAllister sat in her favorite chair by Mrs. Patterson's front window, watching her son play in the yard with the wooden horse that had become his most treasured possession. The autumn light was golden and warm, and for the first time since her wedding day, Clara felt something approaching peace. Sheriff Coleman had found Snake Morrison 2 days after Pete's testimony, not hiding in some distant territory as they'd feared, but drinking himself to death in a squalid boarding house just 50 miles away. The years had not been kind to Samuel Snake Morrison. Consumed by guilt, alcohol, and the inevitable consequences of a violent life, he'd confessed to James Bennett's murder without prompting, seeming almost relieved to finally unburden himself of the secret. The story that emerged was simpler and more sordid than anyone had imagined. James Bennett had indeed owed Snake money, a substantial sum lost in a rigged poker game that Snake himself had orchestrated. When James couldn't pay, Snake had demanded collateral, and James had foolishly offered his father's silver-plated pistol. But when the time came to hand it over, James had changed his mind, pulling the gun on Snake instead. The fight had been brief and brutal. Snake, more experienced with violence than the hot-tempered but ultimately amateur James, had wrested the gun away and shot James Bennett with his own weapon. Panicked and realizing he'd committed murder on Pete Morrison's land, Snake had buried the body in the remote pasture, thrown the pistol into the creek, and disappeared into the night. For 9 years, he'd wandered from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, always looking over his shoulder and drinking away the memories. When Sheriff Coleman found him, Snake had been dying of liver disease, his body finally succumbing to decades of abuse. He actually seemed grateful to tell the truth. Sheriff Coleman had reported to Bo and Clara, said he'd been carrying that secret like a millstone around his neck, never knowing when it might drag him under. With Snake's confession and Pete Morrison's corroborating testimony, Clara was completely cleared of any suspicion in her first husband's death. More importantly, her marriage to Bo was declared legal and binding. She had indeed been a widow when she married him, even though she hadn't known it at the time. The legal complications were resolved with surprising ease. A judge in the territorial capital reviewed the case and ruled that Clara's good faith belief in her widowhood, combined with James Bennett's actual death prior to her second marriage, made the McAllister union valid from the beginning. Tommy's adoption papers were processed without delay, making him Tommy McAllister in law as well as in name. The social complications had taken longer to settle. Martha Henley had been forced to eat her words publicly when the truth came out, though she'd done so with ill grace and continued to mutter about unseemly haste and suspicious circumstances. Most of the town, however, had rallied around their schoolteacher and her new family. Dr. Henderson had been particularly vocal in his support, reminding anyone who would listen that Clara Sullivan had been nothing but an asset to Cedar Ridge for 8 years. Now, watching Tommy chase a butterfly around Mrs. Patterson's garden while Bo worked on repairing a loose board in the fence, Clara felt the profound contentment that comes from surviving a crisis with family intact. Feeling better today? Mrs. Patterson asked, settling into the adjacent chair with her eternal knitting project. Much better, Clara replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. The stress of the investigation had taken a toll on her already fragile health, but with the danger past and her family secure, she'd found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The cough's been better too, Mrs. Patterson observed. Dr. Henderson says sometimes emotional healing can help physical healing along. Clara nodded, though she harbored no illusions about her long-term prognosis. The consumption was still there, still stealing her breath and sapping her strength, but it no longer seemed to be advancing with the relentless speed it had shown before her marriage. Whether that was due to better care, reduced stress, or simply the natural progression of the disease, Clara was grateful for every extra day it gave her with Tommy and Bo. "Mama!" Tommy's excited voice drew her attention back to the yard. "Look what Papa taught me." Her son was attempting to whittle a new figure, this one apparently meant to be a person rather than a horse, judging by the rough approximation of a head and torso. His technique had improved considerably under Bo's patient instruction, though the end result still looked more like an abstract sculpture than a recognizable human form. "It's wonderful, sweetheart," Clara called back, and meant it. The joy on Tommy's face was worth any number of lopsided carvings. Bo looked up from his fence repair and caught Clara's eye, his smile warm with shared contentment. In the past 3 weeks, he'd thrown himself into the role of husband and father with the same dedication he'd once reserved for building his ranch. He was endlessly patient with Tommy's questions, unfailingly gentle with Clara's limitations, and fiercely protective of them both. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Clara confided to Mrs. Patterson. "Even with everything that's happened, the investigation, the gossip, the uncertainty about my health, I've never felt more complete." "That's what love does, Mrs. Patterson replied wisely. "Real love, the kind that's tested and proven, doesn't just make the good times better, it makes the hard times bearable." As if summoned by their conversation, Bo appeared at Clara's side, his work shirt rolled up to his elbows and his hair tousled from the afternoon breeze. "How are my best girls doing?" he asked, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of Clara's head. "Your best girls are doing just fine," Mrs. Patterson replied with a chuckle, "though I notice you didn't include Tommy in that category." "Tommy's my best boy," Bo corrected solemnly. "Different category entirely." He crouched beside Clara's chair, studying her face with the careful attention he'd developed over the past weeks. "You look tired. Should you rest before supper?" "I'm fine," Clara protested, but she was touched by his concern. "Just thinking about how much our lives have changed since that day. Tommy asked you to marry his mama." "Best decision that boy ever made," Bo said firmly, "even if he did go about it in the most direct way possible." Tommy, as if aware he was being discussed, abandoned his whittling project and ran over to join the adults on the porch. His face was flushed with exercise and happiness, and he looked more like a normal 8-year-old than the worried, prematurely serious child he'd been just weeks earlier. "Papa, will you tell me about the ranch again?" Tommy asked, settling cross-legged on the porch floor beside Bo's chair. "About the horses and the cattle, and how someday I'll help you run everything." "Again?" Bo feigned exasperation, but his eyes were warm with affection. "I told you about the ranch yesterday, and the day before that, and—" "But I like hearing about it," Tommy interrupted. "It makes me feel like I really belong somewhere." The simple statement hit all 3 adults like a physical blow. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized how much her son had needed this sense of belonging, this security of having a place in the world that was truly his. "You do belong somewhere, sweetheart," Clara managed to say around the tightness in her throat. "You belong with us, and we belong with you. That's what families do, they belong to each other." Tommy nodded seriously, then brightened. "And when I grow up, I'll take care of the ranch so Papa can rest, and I'll make sure Mama has everything she needs to feel better." The innocent assumption that Clara would be around to see him grown struck her heart like a knife, but she managed to keep her expression serene. Bo, who caught the flash of pain in her eyes, smoothly redirected the conversation. Before you take over the ranch, son, you'll need to learn a lot more about horses and cattle. What do you say we ride out tomorrow and check on the herd in the north pasture? Tommy's face lit up like the 4th of July. Really? Just you and me? Just you and me, Bo confirmed. Man's work. Mrs. Patterson smiled approvingly at Bo's tactful handling of the moment. Well, if you're going to do man's work tomorrow, you'd better get cleaned up for supper tonight. Go wash your hands, Tommy, and put away your whittling things properly. As Tommy scampered off to comply, the adults were left with the comfortable silence of people who understood each other well. He's thriving, Mrs. Patterson observed. I've never seen a child change so dramatically in such a short time. Having a father has made all the difference in the world. He's made all the difference in my world too, Bo replied quietly. I never knew how much I wanted a son until I had one. Clara reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. He's lucky to have you. We both are. Clara, Bo said, his voice carrying a weight that made both women look at him sharply. There's something I need to discuss with both of you. Something I've been thinking about since all this business with James Bennett got resolved. What is it? Clara asked, though something in his tone made her apprehensive. I think it's time Tommy knew the truth about his parentage. The words fell into the evening air like stones into still water. Clara felt her breath catch, and Mrs. Patterson's knitting needles stilled in her hands. Bo, Clara said carefully, we've talked about this. Tommy's too young to understand the complications. Is he? Bo interrupted gently. Clara, that boy is one of the smartest children I've ever encountered. He's already asked me why he looks more like me than like you. He's starting to do the mathematics of when you arrived in Cedar Ridge and when he was born. It won't be long before he figures it out on his own. Clara was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with fears she'd carried for 8 years. What if it changes how he feels about me? What if he's angry that I lied to him? What if it makes him feel more secure, not less? Bo countered. What if knowing that he's truly my son, not just by adoption but by blood, gives him the sense of identity he's been searching for his whole life? Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat delicately. If I may offer an opinion, I think Bo is right. Tommy's questions are becoming more pointed, and children have a way of sensing when adults are keeping secrets from them. Better that he hear the truth from parents who love him than piece it together from overheard conversations or malicious gossip. Clara looked toward the house, where they could hear Tommy splashing enthusiastically in the wash basin, and realized that her little boy was indeed growing up. The protective lies that had seemed necessary when he was small might now be more harmful than helpful. How would we tell him? She asked finally. Simply and honestly, Bo replied. We tell him that I knew and loved his mama before he was born, but circumstances separated us. We tell him that his mama came to Cedar Ridge to make a safe home for him, and that I searched for them both for years before we found each other again. We emphasize that every choice was made out of love for him. And about James Bennett? We tell him that his mama was married to someone else briefly, but that person was never his real father in any way that mattered. We tell him that I am his real father, that I have been since the moment he was conceived, even though I didn't know about him for a while. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in 8 years, she could imagine a future where there were no secrets between her and her son, no careful evasions or half-truths to remember and maintain. All right, she whispered. Tonight, after supper, we'll tell him together. The conversation itself turned out to be easier than Clara had feared and more emotional than Bo had expected. Tommy listened with the grave attention of a child who understands he's being trusted with important adult information. When they finished explaining, he was quiet for several minutes, processing what he'd learned. So you're really my papa? He asked Bo finally. Not just because you married Mama, but because I'm really yours? You're really mine, Bo confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. You have been from the very beginning, even when I didn't know you existed. Tommy nodded solemnly, then looked at Clara, with eyes that held no anger or accusation, only love and understanding beyond his years. Mama, were you scared when Papa disappeared? When you found out you were going to have me, but you were all alone? Terrified, Clara admitted. But you know what? Having you made me brave. Knowing I had to take care of you made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. And now Papa's back, so we don't have to be scared anymore. The simple faith in Tommy's voice broke Clara's heart and healed it at the same time. Now Papa's back, she agreed, and we're a real family, with no secrets and nothing to hide. Tommy launched himself at both his parents, wrapping his arms around them both in a fierce hug that spoke of relief, joy, and the deep satisfaction of finally knowing where he belonged in the world. Later that night, after Tommy had been tucked into bed with his wooden horse and whispered confessions that he'd always hoped Bo would turn out to be his real father, Clara and Bo sat on Mrs. Patterson's front porch under a canopy of stars. "No regrets?" Bo asked softly. "None," Clara replied, and was surprised to find she meant it completely. "For the first time in 8 years, I feel like we're living in truth instead of shadows. Whatever happens now, Tommy will know he was loved and wanted from the very beginning." "Whatever happens now," Bo echoed, taking her hand in his. "We'll face it as a family, all of us together, the way it should have been from the start." Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the solid warmth of his presence. The consumption was still there, still waiting in the wings of her life, but it no longer seemed like the defining factor of her existence. She was Clara McAllister now, wife and mother, beloved and belonging, living in truth and surrounded by love. And if that wasn't a happy ending, it was something even better. It was a new beginning, built on foundations strong enough to last whatever time they had left together.